presentation on getting the history of family. Just so we get a good bearing on who's here, how many people or Kettings are related to the Kettings here? Please raise your hand. Note where those people are in case you're talking about them. How many museum members do we have here this evening? Raise your hand. As always, a lot of members. Thank you very much for coming. We can't run this place without you folks as members, and we appreciate that. If you are not a member and you pay to get in this evening, we do allow you to take your entrance fee and apply it towards a membership. So you can buy a membership, and the membership benefits are unlimited visits to the museum. You never pay when you're going to the museum. We have discounts on everything in the gift shop. Free admissions to the speaker series. You never pay to go to a speaker series. So again, you can apply if you on your way out. Just tell the girl at the door that you'd like to buy a membership, and she will apply the money you pay to get in here towards your membership. The museum is supported by admissions, fundraisers, donations, and sponsorships. Tonight, this presentation is being sponsored by Country Club, and we went around of applause for Country Club. So we have some coming events. You can't have this without advertising. So here's our coming events. On September 29th is a school out day for the children. So the kids are out of school. If you want to bring them past the museum, we're going to have story time. And we'll also have lead point. So the kids will have an activity at the museum when they're driving you crazy already, but being out just a couple hours. Bring them down to the museum, we got activity for them. Homeschool lessons, we continue to do our homeschool lessons. The next one is October 13th and October 24th. We bring homeschool kids in, they do not pay. We give them free admission to the museum. It's going to be on Pompeii. So they're going to study about Pompeii, do projects to do with Pompeii. On October 4th, we have Stand Up for Down Syndrome at Cape Girardeau at Capitol Park, and we're going to have a booth down there. So please, if you're inclined to support that, we'd love to have you down and support us and stop at our booth. October 18th, we have a trolley ride through history, and these flyers are available at the front desk. Let me tell you a little bit about this. We bring the trolleys in, however many people, we get them on trolleys, and then we take off. On this one, we're going to start at 9 o'clock in the morning. We will leave the St. Genevieve Museum at 9 o'clock. Our first stop will be Bloomsdale Excavating. And if you have ever been into Bloomsdale Excavating and seen their museum that they have in their lobby, it is fantastic. So Bloomsdale Museum, or Bloomsdale Excavating, is actually going to get a chance to brag on their company, and we will have some time to listen to their story, a presentation, and you will be able to mill around their museum. We will board the bus, we will leave there, and we're going to go out to the Terrace Winery. Oh, I'm struck it up with a couple of people. Now we know what kind of crowd we got here. Okay, so at the Terrace Winery, those people are going to brag on the Terrace Winery. They're going to tell us the story of the Terrace Winery, who owned that farm, what's taken place to bring it to where it's at today. And we'll have time there to get a drink. Yes, Cindy, a drink, and maybe more if you're well inclined to do that. After that presentation, at the same location, we will have a presentation on the St. Genevieve meteorite. And for anybody that's aware of this, there was a meteorite that fell, or was discovered, is what I should say, in St. Genevieve in 1880. About a 530-pound meteorite, and it was discovered about 1 mile from the Terrace Winery. So we'll also have a presentation there on the St. Genevieve meteorite, tell you whose farm it was located on, and it was located on an, we say Otti, O-T-T, oh, they said Odo, Odi, I think is the way they pronounce it. So that meteorite was discovered there. We have a piece of that meteorite in the museum. My cousin Jerry Wolf went to Germany. He found out where this meteorite, a piece of it was. They cut slabs off. And he flew to Germany, had it authenticated, bought the meteorite slab, brought it back to St. Genevieve and said, it's not an excuse that we can't have this in our museum. And he donated it to the St. Genevieve Museum. We'll have that story, and we'll tell you more about that. We'll leave the winery, and we'll come back. We'll go across Lawrence Road, and we're going to stop at County Line Quarry. West County Quarry is what it is. West County Quarry. And that is on my Uncle Gus's farm. And I always tell people that when we were growing up, he had an alfalfa field on top of that mountain. And we come off of that hill, I can't tell you how many times, sliding sideways with tractors trying to hold back a load of hay. Little did we know that we should have been digging underneath. That's where the money was at. Not that alfalfa. So they will make a presentation, get a chance to brag on their farm. A fantastic story, and I think you'll be amazed at how much they're taking out of there and what they're producing. Our next stop will be at the Weingarten Church, and we'll have a presentation on the Weingarten Church. We'll be able to get out, we'll be able to tour the church, and tell you about the history of the Weingarten Church. Upon completion of that, we go down to the Midway Cafe. The Midway has a lot of great history. I had somebody tell me, well, there's nothing old about the Midway. Well, yes, there is. Not the Midway that's there now, but the history of the Midway is fantastic. So they're putting that together, along with photos and a presentation, and we will have time to take in a meal at the Midway. So we'll stop, have a meal at the Midway, and we'll end back up here in St. Genevieve. We were supposed to drive it today, but my partner, where is she? Raise your hand, Jan, wherever you're at. She bailed on me. So we will get that. We'll get a tighter timeline, and watch on the Facebook. We will have that timeline, so you'll know exactly. The cost is $35 per person that wants to go on the bus. If you do not want to go on the bus, you can actually follow us in your car, and the car, however many people you can shove in it, is $35 for a car. So please make your plans. We hope you can join us. I think it's going to be a very interesting. There's some great stories at these locations. Again,
Robert, did you get a date for that, or is it still undetermined?
man, some stuff's got to be a secret. It's October the 18th.
Okay, thank you.
And it'll start at 9 o'clock in the morning. We will leave the St. Genevieve Museum at 9 o'clock. So again, last time we had this, the trolley sold out. So please get your tickets, and if we get enough tickets, we'll get a second trolley. It's not a problem. But I think this is very interesting. If you don't know the history of these places, to stop in there and have them brag on their location is everything, so they can tell us the story. On October 22nd, we'll have another speaker series here, and that one is going to be on the Civil War Navy. Now, I don't know a lot about the Civil War Navy, but there was a Civil War Navy, and the gentleman's going to put that on October 22nd, this speaker series. November 5th, we're going to have the tornado of 1925 in southeast Missouri. Huge tornado, evidently a monumental event. So we'll have people in to tell us about that, this slide, and what went on at that. So if you came in this evening, The admission booth is out front. If you happen to come through the door, would you stop up front and pay the admission? We appreciate that. Because again, this museum only runs on donations. So we surely appreciate it. We appreciate everybody that's here and sponsoring us this evening. So now to get to the program, let's see if I hit all of them. Well, I would like to say all of those events, they are all put on by our museum staff. And they're back at the door. I'd like to have a round of applause. So we're down to Jack and Mickey Koetting. So we finally got there. And we got 15 minutes, Jack. So Jack is the oldest son of the Koetting family, right? So there's plenty of other Koettings in the room that you see, and Mickey's going to fill in with him, and they're going to make a presentation for us. A lot of pictures over on the wall, and I'll let him tell you about those. So a round of applause for Jack and Mickey, please.
Thank you, Bob. Appreciate it. So I'm going to do my best to tell you the story of how my family came here from across the city, and the history of Koetting's store and how it lasted 112 years. And and I'll be using basically a biography by my great aunt Laura Koetting. Back in 1925, she penned this biography of her father, and also later years she also penned a story of 100 years, first 100 years of Koetting's. So, she said, my father was born October 27, 1856 in the hamlet of Holling, Germany. So you can see here the map showing the area between Bonn and Koblenz. Right there, that's where the hamlet of Holling, Germany. And Germany at that time was also known as Prussia. And his father, Goswin Koetting, actually it's pronounced Gusbein, and his mother, Anna, chose for him the simple name John. No middle name, no middle initial. Explained later that being poor people, and they had already 6 children, they could afford no more. In due time, however, he was baptized according to the Roman Catholic rites. And I believe we have his birth certificate there. She says grandfather was a cabinet maker of so great a skill that his services were in demand when a house was to be finished or furnished for miles around. The family lived in comfortable circumstances, enjoying the distinction of being the only family in Holling which could afford to kill a hog each winter entirely for home consumption. The common fare in those days consisted of potatoes, goat milk, and cheese, and dark rye bread baked weekly in the community oven. It was father's chief duty in early boyhood to conduct the goat to and from the village pasture and watering trough. In the Rhine country, villages are frequently only a mile or 2 apart. When my father carried the eggs to market, Neuweit, 12 miles distant, he passed through 7 villages. The school which he attended for a little more than 3 years was a mile from Holling and served 5 neighboring villages. He learned very readily, but to him the most interesting day of the school year was the one when, after singing Hoch die Kaiser, each pupil was rewarded with a cookie from the emperor. In the fall of 1865, father's oldest brother William, having come almost to military age, his parents decided that it was high time to migrate to a free country. Grandfather wrote to his brother-in-law in America that he intended to join him, and in October started with his family to Hamburg. The first part of the journey was made in a farm cart. The travelers spent a Memorial Day in Cologne, visiting the cathedral, Then they crossed the Rhine over a pontoon bridge and boarded the first railroad train they'd ever seen. At Hamburg, they took steerage passage on the ship Germania, leaving Hamburg on October 21st, 1865, bound for New York. The steerage class too cold to go to school barefooted, he was compelled to wear his mother's shoes because he had none of his own. During the school, he found that he lacked the courage to face the ridicule of the other boys, so he hid the shoes in a hollow stump and went to school barefooted in the snow. The new house was built after pioneer fashion. The logs fell near to the land. Only the first story was finished the first winter. The parents and the small children were made comparatively comfortable in the single room below, but the boys who slept upstairs often awoke to find their beds covered with snow, which had drifted through the unchinked walls. At the age of 14, Father was apprenticed to a shoemaker at Lynn, Missouri. After 3 years apprenticeship, he went to Augusta, Missouri, and then to Washington, Missouri, where he worked a year at each place at shoemaking. During this time, all he earned had been dutifully contributed to paying off the mortgage on the homestead. When he decided at the age of 20 to open a shop for himself, it was necessary for him to borrow all of his capital, $13 from his uncle. At Bonnet's Mill, he made shoes, as well as repairing them. One of his proudest and saddest occasions of his life was the night when he walked 5 miles to a dance in a pair of high-heeled boots that he made that was then in vogue. During his spare time at Bonnet's Mill, Father occupied himself learning to speak French, to send messages by telegraph, and to assemble clocks. As soon as his profits permitted, he went to St. Louis to buy a stock of jewelry to sell in his shoe shop. One of the reasons that he decided to open up other avenues is because he found out that convicts with new sewing machines could make shoes faster and cheaper than what he could by hand. So he was looking for something else that he could have in his shop. And he took this occasion to receive 2 hours instruction in repairing watches at the jewelry house. When he returned home, he subscribed to the magazine Keystone, a watchmaker's trade journal, and applied himself diligently to learn from the craft he aspired to. It was on him returning from this trip that Father traveled on the first electrically lighted steamer to ascend the Missouri River. Imagine the thrill of disembarking in the midst of the awestruck crowd which had assembled at the sight of a boat's lantern, casting a ray of light 100 yards long on the river. Bonnet's Mill, however, could not support a very profitable jewelry trade. The Father soon decided to move to Evansville, Illinois, a little town of about 800, where many people were employed in building a steel bridge over the Okaw, or Kaskaskia River. He lived with his brother Engelbert and his sister-in-law Rosie. He soon became attached to Clara, his brother's sister-in-law, who later became my mother. Courtship in those days was quite different from now. Dates are supposed to have consisted of sitting in the kitchen with the family until 9 o'clock on Saturday nights when there was no church services. Mother's sister, Christine, was always sent along with brother and her escort when they were permitted to attend a dance or call on a friend. The father had a younger brother, Henry, who was not averse to keeping occupied. Henry married Christine 10 years later, the third brother to marry a girl in the same family. 3 years after his coming to Evansville, Father moved to St. Genevieve, Missouri, where he began the business, which he is now engaged in. He was then 30 years old. It is small wonder that he fell readily into the companionship of half a dozen bachelors at the hotel. One day he was admiring a lot of kitchen stoves, which one of his bachelor friends, a hardware dealer, had just received. "I guess I'll soon be buying one of those," he said. By the way, this is the actually the ship manifest, the page from the ship manifest, and down there on the left, largely you can see Gosselin, Koetting, Timothy, William, Engelbert, Matthias, John. So he said, I guess I'll soon be buying one of those. His friend laughed and said, if you get married in the next year, John, I'll give you one. A few weeks later, on November 22nd, 1887, Reverend Breilinger of St. Boniface Catholic Church at Evansville officiated the marriage of my parents. It was customary in Evansville that the groom select and give the bride her wedding dress. Mother had always dreamed of a white silk wedding dress with yards of lace trimming. Imagine her disappointment when Father's choice proved to be a brown woolen cashmere. Furthermore, it was a custom that if the bride lived near enough, the bridal party should walk to and from the church. As usual, Father walked just a pace ahead of Mother. He still does. One of the cross-laid boards of the narrow walk was loose, and as Father stepped on one end of it, the other end flew up just in time to trip Mother. The reports disagree as to whether the groom emerged from his preoccupation in time to prevent the ignominy of a complete prostration or not. After the festivities, the newlyweds started their home in St. Genevieve. Their 2 living rooms behind the jewelry shop were but scantily furnished. Dry goods boxes did service for a kitchen cabinet, china closet, wardrobe, and table until the furniture which Grandfather Koetting was making for them should arrive. Father's bachelor associations had drawn him into many public activities. He served as an alderman and lobbied for the purchase of a fire engine. When the city purchased its first fire engine, the council elected him Grand Chief of the Fire Department. As time went on, Father added to his business a stock of clothing, dry goods, millinery with Mother's assistance, musical instruments, groceries, and finally furniture. His nephew Albert lived in Evansville, Illinois, and worked at the store during the summers. So we're going to learn of his experiences from my wife as she tells Albert's story.
Well, Albert is important, and those of you Kettings here that are know the genealogy and thinking, where did Albert come from? Because he's not in that list of 9 kids that John and Clara had. But Albert is Engelbert and Rose's son, and he came over to help out. What's important about him, he noticed everything going on in St. Genevieve, and he wrote it down. So we have it in his memoirs what was going on in the 1890s in St. Genevieve. So we've got some recollections. So for vacation, I went out to John and St. Genevieve until school would start again. Now once more, I was with my father's brother and my mother's sister. You remember that 3 brothers married 3 sisters. And it's very confusing when you get to genealogy, figuring out who's who. And since they all use the same first names, it gets really confusing. But they do, and they all look alike too. So, St. Genevieve is the oldest permanent settlement west of the Mississippi River and had a population of 1,400 against Evansville 700. It had more and better business places, but did not have telephones like at home. They did not have a stock law though, so horses and cows were on the streets. The first brick house built west of the Mississippi River was there, and it was still standing. You may have had dinner there sometime lately. So the church and the schoolhouse were in the same block with the 1 block long street between the 2. So Uncle's jewelry store was where we could see down the short street in front of the church and see all of the wedding parties and the funerals that stopped by. was a good place to be nosy. Street lights consisted of a glass box, so these are some of the first street lights in St. Genevieve. A glass box with a small kerosene lamp inside. The lamplighter was an old crippled man with a ladder and a walking cane which had a curved handle at one end and was tipped with iron at the other end. He made his rounds in the morning when he trimmed the wicks and filled the lamps. In the evening, he came again and lit the lamps. It made very little light. The lamplighter always had a bunch of stray dogs following him around, and every once in a while he would turn around and poke the dogs with his cane, and the dogs seemed to enjoy it as much as the old man did. The town was a good part French. Some of the old people could not speak English, and articles brought to us to repair wrapped in old French newspapers. Uncle John had learned to speak French. When at the store, I swept the floor and learned to clean clocks. When I worked by the window, I could see all of it that was passing by. Men wore stiff hats, and most had a mustache. The ladies wore 3 or 4 starched petticoats that would make crackling sound when they sat down. And when they got into the church pews, it was even louder. Because there was no railroad, the mail came by star routes, one from Farmington and one from St. Mary's. And our daily St. Louis paper was delivered by carrier. And we had 2 local papers, the Fair Play and the Herald. Well, the Herald's still here, and you probably remember when the Fair Play was still being printed. One time, Uncle John took us to see a cat show that was in town at the time. The owner told us that it was the only cat show of trained house cats in the world. Years later, I read in the paper that he told us the truth. The only act I can remember was a large cat dressed like a man and another large cat, a smaller cat dressed like a lady, pushing a little baby buggy that had a little cat dressed like a baby in it. Pushed by the 2 big cats who walked upright with Papa and the Mama pushing the little cat in the baby buggy. So the store was devoted to watches, so clocks and jewelry, but it wasn't long before musical instruments were added to the inventory. In 1891, Uncle John was authorized agent for the celebrated Etsy piano and organs, and learned how to tune them and play the stringed instruments in the shop. So Grandpa John just kept adding more things and learning about more things and opening more little departments in the store. In the store, I washed windows and showcases, swept the floor, and helped with the repair work on jewelry and musical instruments. Once we ordered a big bass horn for the colored band. This is a sign of the times then. When the thing arrived, all the band members came to blow in it and try it because they didn't have the money to take it out. It stayed here a few days when a school teacher came in, and he picked up the horn and did quite a bit of blowing to test it and down again, instead of down. When I told him that every member of the band had played on it and blown that horn, he made an ugly face and got out his handkerchief and kept trying to wipe his mouth. So it finally sold though, but it was not long until the bass horn came back. There were only wagons and at the time, so it was not long until the bass horn was out there riding in the countryside and had set the horn on the wagon with the bell down, and it was bent and dented as bad as could be. So we spent much long hammering and rubbing, but we couldn't get that bass horn to look anything like it did when it first came in. So, poor thing. Now, I looked around and I was going to say that if those of you that are young enough that don't remember cassettes and 8-tracks, but I think most of this group would remember cassettes and 8-tracks, so I won't tell that little anecdote. But at this time, so this is about 1891, 1892, at the time, the first spring motor talking machines came on the market, and we put them in stock. So these are the very first machines that could reproduce talking, singing, things of that nature. The Victors were priced at $7.50 and $10, and the Edisons were $12. Both used the same wax cylinders and came with ear tubes. Horns could be bought extra. We also had stock of records and boxes in which to keep the records, plus shavers and decoders for those who wanted to shave their old records and reuse them to make their own recordings. That's pretty advanced, I think, if you can record your own. When people came to learn about the talking machines, they would say, "We heard that you have a machine that can talk, is that right?" And Uncle would say, "Albert, play for them." And then I would play some records and answer a lot of questions and explain that it did not really talk, but reproduced sound that had formerly been spoken into it. I played Turkey in the Straw, Uncle Josh, the U.S. Fife and Drum Corps, Annie Laurie, and the one with jokes, until the jokes were no longer funny for me. Then we got a new machine that was in a glass case, and it was a nickel in the slot up there. And when someone who I knew did not intend to buy anything asked me to play for them, I would tell them to put the nickel in the machine. And so one man just took the nickel and threw it in the big horn. So we had a machine like that when I was a kid, and I'm older than I look. But we had to crank it up, and play like that. But it didn't. It had records rather than the wax cylinders. So we would go out in the garage and crank that up and dance in the garage. So later, as I remember, Uncle also attended Professor Clark's School of Embalming and obtained a license to practice. He bought a supply of coffins and became the county's only undertaker. At first, when I was there, quite a number of bodies were taken from the river. They were people who had drowned during the St. Louis tornado, so not the 1896 one, but earlier. As he was undertaker, he buried as many corpses, and sometimes people would come from St. Louis to claim the body, and Uncle and his partner would dig up the corpses at night, because 1896 was very hot summer, and it was cooler at night. He said that one night they had a corpse laying on top of the box it had been buried in, and there was a lantern at each end. And a carriage went by, and the driver got so scared that he whipped the horses, and sound could be heard as far as sound could be heard. Uncle's house had 2 stone rooms, the jewelry store and the coffin shop. The living rooms were upstairs, and at the rear was a 1-story kitchen and dining room. That part of the house was built of brick. Uncle built it himself. To begin with, he had hired a bricklayer who promptly took sick, and it meant that there was no one to be found to replace him. So Uncle thought that he could learn to lay brick, and so he tried. He just keeps thinking that he can do anything. So he needed to get a long fine and finish the job. Later, he laid the brick for a 2-story stone building. in the store was an old iron safe that was held together with big-headed, and that two-story building that we're talking about is the building that is the current museum. So he laid the brick for that. This is a picture of Albert, who is behind the counter with John. John is in the middle, and Albert is right there next to him, as he was a young kid. But anyway, in the store was an iron safe that was held together with big-headed rivets and had an iron key. It's in the local museum now. It's still there. I asked Uncle John if that was the safe that the James boys had robbed. And he said that the James boys didn't rob the safe. The banker just reached in and handed the money over to him. Now, perhaps he got his humor from his grandfather, and those whose first name was Hilarious. Now, I knew my son, and when I found out that John's grandfather and my John's great grandfather was named Hilarious, I added that to his name. So they're both hilarious. So anyway, that was the end of the recollections about his time in St. Genevieve and time at the store. So it's good that Albert was there and Albert wrote all of this stuff down. So hopefully one of this generation will write things down too. Okay.
So as mentioned by Albert, when his Uncle John was 43, he learned embalming and purchased some coffins for the store and became a licensed undertaker. He served a term as county coroner, but since a coroner may not legally succeed himself in office, he gave place to Anton Hunold, his partner in undertaking. They continued in the undertaking coroner business for 15 years. In the meantime, my 5 brothers were practically taking his place behind the counter. So in 1913, Father opened a moving picture theater called the Lyric. So you can see on the left-hand side the Lyric Theater. It was a silent movie theater. They also had live productions there as well. And my aunt says 3 of us boys and girls formed the nucleus of a real home talent orchestra, which played at all performances, and the other boys operated the machine, managed the advertising, selected the pictures, and sold the tickets. It was his opinion that the best way to prevent young people from using their leisure for mischief making was to fill every spare minute with home activities. After operating the Lyric for 8 years without a profit, because the small theater population could not support the kind of service he thought proper, Father closed it and used the theater building for a furniture sales room. Father may be called a jack of all trades, but he is master of at least one, watchmaking. It is remarkable to what degree of skill he has attained in his self-education. Although he is 69 years old, he works at his repair bench for hours on bright days without becoming nervous, and the more unusual the job, the greater his zest in attacking it. To divert his mind from this tedious work, he expresses his creative nature in forms of agriculture, carpentry, masonry, painting, and engineering. He reads 2 metropolitan newspapers every day and a number of trade journals and other periodicals on Sunday. No man of similar amount of schooling has done as much as his father for public education in St. Genevieve. He has served 5 terms and filled every office on the Board of Education, being elected the last 2 terms against his will. He speaks English and French and several dialects of German, as well as his native Rhinelandish, and is very anxious that his children study languages. Father's sister Gertrude says that when he was in his teens, Father never stopped to open a gate, but vaulted right over it. Though time has robbed him of some of his agility, he retains a boyishness that, much to Mother's frequent alarm, manifests itself in jig steps and gymnastic feats. Although Father goes seldom further from home than the next corner, he has many friends. His broad information, ready wit, an abundant repertoire of anecdotes, riddles, and humorous songs, as well as his ability to present them in several languages, holds strangers as well as acquaintances for hours. A characteristic picture of him would portray a man of small stature and knock knees, with swarthy complexion and bushy eyebrows, which conceal twinkling hazel eyes. Wearing as many as 2 sweaters, a coat, and a derby hat, standing with his back to the stove and punctuating the amusing occurrence, which he's recalling for a customer or a traveling salesman, with alternate puffing at and flipping ashes from his Hoffman handmade cigar. By the way, in the Lyric Theater, when it closed, even though when it did close, up until 1970, you could still see the painted screen in the back. Right. So now the other section of my presentation is on the store itself, the first 100 years. So our founder is John Koetting. There he is. As I said, he had no middle name or initial. And when he was 9 years old, he immigrated with his family to the United States, where they homesteaded land in central Missouri near Frankenstein. His schooling began in Germany, but augmented by only a few months after the family home had been built. After his shoemaking jobs in Lynn, Missouri, and Washington, Missouri, when he was 20, he borrowed the $13 and opened his own shoe repair shop in Bonnet's Mill. In his spare time, he learned to speak French to send messages by telegraph to repair clocks. When he went to St. Louis to buy jewelry to sell in his shop, he also took 2 hours of instruction in watch repair. Bonnetsville could not support a very profitable jewelry trade, so he moved to Evansville, Illinois. 3 years later, the St. Genevieve Herald carried the following news item. John Koetting, the jeweler of Evansville, Illinois, was in town this week looking for a fitting location to establish himself as watchmaker and jeweler. He says the city of Evansville on the historical Oak Cow on the Kaskaskia River is circumscribed by 2 narrow bounds to afford a good progressive jeweler who is inclined to push things, remunerative employment, and is concluded to try his fortune in St. Genevieve. We learned that he has rented part of Dr. Carso's house and will probably commence business there next week. So this is the first Koetting store. Around the turn of the century. And on the right there is the clock, which we still have in our possession. But that was the time standard for all of St. Genevieve. John would travel on train to St. Louis to Union Station to get the official time there and come back to town and set that clock. And it was a position where people on the street could see that through the window.
Jack, where was this building on the left?
It was adjacent to the Open Foods hardware store and what would be part of where the Herald building was originally. It was devoted to watches, clocks, and jewelry. It wasn't long until musical instruments crept into the inventory. In 1891, Mr. Koetting was the authorized agent for the celebrated Etsy pianos and organs, accompanied by his good friend, Mr. Anton Huno, who went to St. Louis and brought down several samples of the Etsy instruments for display in his store. When his stock outgrew the shop, John bought the Guillaume property adjoining it and rented part of it to Anton Huno, a cigar maker. Since each of these and later locations all face the courthouse square, Koetting could later adopt the slogan, however many years, on the square. Always energetic and ambitious, Mr. Koetting was also a self-educated man. He read trade journals, enhanced his knowledge of timepieces and jewelry. He bought a telescope and a set of books and studied astronomy. He learned to tune and repair organs and to play the stringed instruments he sold. The business kept growing and changing. In 1897, the coffins were moved to a shed, and a millinery shop occupied the space. Mrs. Koetting and her sister Agnes, who later became Mrs. Henry Morrow, ran the hat store. And in An addition was built over the attic to house the men's clothing department. At about the turn of the century, a property was purchased from Mrs. Zeiser, and a line of groceries was put in. In 1906, a stock of furniture and pianos followed. In 1907, Mr. Koetting replaced the Zeiser building with a two-story brick structure which provided living quarters above for the family and space for the merchandising departments, except for furniture and pianos. And that is the building that is now the museum. And in fact, in the takedown or the conversion of the museum, our store, over on the table there, you will see a bottle that fell out of the roof from 1908. It just has an invoice from my great-grandfather at that time, and it said that the letter was put in there at the time the building was built. So in 1914, a similar building replaced the old one to the east side and was connected with it on 2 levels. Pianos and furniture were then housed on the 2nd floor, which was served by a hand-powered elevator. And if you visit the museum, you can still see that elevator there. The first floor was occupied by the new Koetting venture, the silent movie theater known as the Lyric. By the time the Lyric ended its not too profitable existence, Koetting's was a general store, having dry goods, women's clothing, shoes, hardware, gift items, notions, kerosene, and poultry. Expanding business required expanding staff. Mr. and Mrs. Koetting eventually had 5 sons and later 4 daughters. As each grew up, they took an appropriate place in the workforce. Leo, the oldest, is the tallest one in back, went to Valparaiso, Indiana to learn to tune pianos his father sold. Felix, on the left side of Leo, was studied as a doctor of optics and learned to suit spectacles, which the store sold to the visual needs of the purchasers. Leo, Clarence, Laura, Anna, and Rosie learned to play the musical instruments which composed the orchestra for the Lyric Theater. Each of the girls had a share in their mother's clerical millinery work. Otto, the one on the left in the first row, drove the delivery wagon and gradually grew into the store manager. Edwin, in the Navy uniform there in the middle, learned to repair timepieces and jewelry, and eventually also became the bookkeeper and accountant. As time went on and all phases of the mercantile business were satisfactorily conducted by the family and trusted employees, Mr. Koetting personally continued only in his watchmaking and engaged primarily in public relations. He was a natural for that role. He was equally fluent in the Badisch dialect of the German farmers and the French spoken by the local gentry. He spoke English without an accent. He had a keen sense of humor and a vast repertoire of stories with which he entertained a customer, drummer, or passerby. He participated in a variety of community affairs: the volunteer fire department, the school board, amateur dramatics, Lagioni, and others. Mr. Koetting was essentially an outdoor man, one who loved the soil and growing things. He found time to raise pigs, keep a cow and chickens, plant trees, and finally in his later years to cultivate a small field. He bought real estate, improved the managers who sold it. These things and watch repair were his life. He died in September 1936, 1 month short of his 80th birthday. His son Otto took over the management of the business at that time. Mrs. Claire Koetting inherited the store and other properties when John died. Only 3 of their 9 children, Otto, Felix, and Edward, were involved directly in the store business. On April 3rd, 1937, Moll Koetting, Otto, and Edwin met to discuss the forming of Koetting's Incorporated, which is approved by the state later that month. In 1937, salary of the business manager was $115 a month, and that of assistant manager, $110. Employees Welton Groby was to be paid $17 a week, and Alma Milker, $10 a week. Young John F. Koetting, my father, was a part-time employee at 75 cents a day. If salaries seem low by our inflation standards, consider the selling prices of commodities offered by Koetting's store that year. Bon Ton coffee, 27 cents a pound. Sugar-baked picnic hams, 33 cents a pound. Sunsweet prunes, 2-pound package, 25 cents. Vinegar, 1 gallon, 33 cents. Orange candy slices, 10 cents a pound. Men's blue work shirts, 49 cents each. Women's summer dresses, in Royal, Batiste, or Prince, 98 cents each. Bed sheets, 81 by 90 inches, 99 cents. And gold seal Condoleum rugs, 9 by 12 feet, $6.95. So Vicky's going to tell you now about a second generation.
Otto and Edwin and Felix were the three that stayed working in the store. Otto was the general manager and president of the corporation, and he was born on August the 9th, 1890. He was the second child of John and Clara, and at an early age he became the delivery boy and drove around in the delivery trucks. And if you're over there looking, there's pictures of them and then a little facsimile that you could, if you were a child, run around with it. But the museum owns it now, and so you can't do that. So he was also a hod carrier when his dad decided to be a bricklayer. He became a hod carrier, and so he helped build the building over there at 360 Market Street. He also worked. He was inducted into the Army during World War I and served in the Quartermaster Corps, which is absolutely appropriate because that's kind of what he did as a civilian. Now, Felix took a correspondence course from South Bend College of Optics, and it was his way to become an optometrist to assist with the eyewear which the store sold, and he later moved to St. Louis and opened his practice there. And just tonight I found out that Edwin also had a license to be an optometrist, and the Koetting seemed to like that. Felix's son, Bob Koetting, went into optometry, and he was part of Koetting's Associates. He formed that, and so many of you may have gone up there to get contact lenses. So Edwin Koetting was born. He was the fourth son. He was born October the 15th, 1895, and we have some of Edwin's grandchildren. Stick your hands up in the air and wave it around. There we go. And he taught school for several years, and during the time of World War I, he suffered a hearing loss. He was an instructor for rifle shooting, and so he lost his hearing while they were shooting rifles. So with a good mind for details, he couldn't go back to teaching, and he in careful work, he became the bookkeeper and the assistant manager and Mr. Fix-It for the jewelry and many other things. Edwin died in 1961, and at that time, or about a year later, his son Larry Koetting took over as the bookkeeper, and Larry was bookkeeper until the 1990s when I took over as the bookkeeper. When Otto returned from the war, he assisted his father in managing the store, and he was so well liked by customers and family and employees that when he incurred his father's wrath for buying a carload of watermelons, every section of the store continued to expand throughout the 1930s, and after his father's death, Otto's food was the focal point for Otto. Under his leadership in 1949, the store was remodeled, and there's Edwin as the bookkeeper and manager. The city's first shopping carts came in, there you go, in 1949. We can't even think about that, going grocery shopping without a shopping cart, but that was the very first ones to come in. And I understand you used to go in with your shopping list, hand it to somebody at the front counter. They would go around, get what you needed, bring it back, and you could take it home. Think of all the impulse items that you wouldn't buy if you did it like that today. Your shopping money would be in half just about. Or mine would. Okay. You got the shopping carts, they were added, and the concept of supermarket providing self-service shopping was introduced to his customers. Refrigerated cases for produce and dairy items were added, and frozen foods made their appearance. So we see a lot of new things that are coming in. He started from the ground up is the perfect description of Otto. Otto Koetting's management of the store. The phrase can best be understood when you consider that he was one of the high carriers when they constructed the first brick store building in the early 1900s. Otto was largely responsible for the growth of the company during the 60 years of his business, taking control in December of 1946 when Ma Koetting died. So he started out as a delivery boy in the 1900s, assistant manager in 1936, general manager and president of Koetting's Inc. in 1946, and negotiated with the landlord. In one of the descriptions of the board meeting, Otto had gone to see the landlord, and there was a lot of back and forth about whether the landlord was going to raise the rent and how much, and he tried to talk him down, and there's this way and that way, and it's kind of good to know that the landlord of Koetting's Foodway was Otto Koetting. So it kind of, messes up the idea that he had this tough conversation with the landlord. So after Otto died, then the landlord was John F. Koetting. He bought John separated. Koetting's store with Koetting's family have always been in the forefront of community improvement. In the early years, when a group of citizens undertook a voluntary project to improve the streets and the sidewalks of the business area, the store contributed labor, supplies, and refreshments for the workers. In later years, the store made sizable donations for the relief of the victims of local floods. They purchased lots for the financing of the Elder Manufacturing Company expansion, and other lots to assist the financing of the International Edition as a residential area. So they did a lot for the community. The southwest edge of the town, that's where the residential area is. During the World War II, they bought U.S. government bonds, and they donated to the Catholic parish for construction of the parochial school building and the Presbyterian parish for the erection of its church. Otto Koetting proved to be a very progressive businessman. The grocery department was a special interest to him, and new items, new ways of handling and selling, sometimes learned from traveling salesmen, presented challenges that best stimulated him. He allied the store to Associated Grocers, which provided the advantage of group purchasing, consultation services, and monthly publications, which he read faithfully. learning to the contracting machine, he traveled to Arkansas to buy one and get advice on a nut cracking service. In the years of his retirement, his principal work was the use of the machine in a small back room, which he labeled the Nutcracker Suite. And so that's his second generation.
Third generation, my father, John Francis Koetting. I was only son. Started like his father, being a delivery boy in 1937 before he enlisted in the Army Air Force in World War II. When he returned from the war, he again joined in the family business, except that he was now learning from his father and was named second assistant manager. In 1948, he was named to the building committee to steer the next renovation and modernization completed in July of the following year. His merchandising and advertising ideas spearheaded the growth from that period onward. That's crispy crackers. And at the bottom of that picture, you can't see it, but Dad had put 75,000 crackers would soak up so many bowls of soup. I don't know if he counted it or measured it out. But that went all the way to the ceiling in the old store. And then there's a Starkist tuna boat that was 3 cans for 99 cents. So Dad kind of put forth the idea of mass displays as one of his fortes. That was 48, 49. So his incorporating giveaways as part of anniversary celebrations also led to big crowds in the streets each year from 49 to 53. There we go. A washing machine and one of the area's first television sets purchased from Oakenfoos Hardware up the street were the draws, plus bedroom suites from the store's own furniture inventory provided the excitement. Midway through 1953, the business had experienced such growth that extensive alteration and modernization was again urgently needed. By that time, the furniture department, despite occupying almost half the floor space, was only contributing to about 10% to the annual sales. The remaining inventory was sold off to Royce Rich and replaced with new products and categories of grocery items, as John embraced the mission of making Koetting's the town's most progressive supermarket. Grand opening of the remodeled store was in April of 1954. The anniversary drawing for the 69th year in October of 1956 featured a car filled with groceries. True, the car was not new, but it still ran. John took the opportunity to use it as a billboard to advertise the event by painting the sides, the hood, the trunk, and the roof. And on the back fender there it says, "See Brooksy, the clown." And so Brooksy was with Brooks Ketchup. So you can see there with the kids in front of the Brooks Ketchup display. He also designed the store's logo and hand-painted it on the side of the new freight truck in 1957, brought in to haul groceries down from St. Louis. Dad developed his own unique style of lettering and numbering signs by painting them first on the window itself, and then later on he switched to painting them on white butcher paper to be hung in the front windows and throughout the store. Under his leadership, the supermarket front windows went through another updating and remodel in 1961. In that same year, Edward Koetting died from a heart attack, and his son Larry took over the bookkeeping duties. In 1963, the 76th anniversary contest was to guess the total weight of all Koetting's employees at the time. With an official weigh-in by Mayor William Scher to determine the winner. Mrs. Lillian Oberly was the winner and racked up $137.93 in the 8-minute shopping spree. Later that year, my mother, Dolores Dodo Koetting, after raising us 4 kids, myself, brothers Jim and Jerry, and Janelle, started working at the store during busy times. Christmas of that year brought the first of John's unique wooden window displays. I remember him searching through Christmas cards that the family received, find just the right one or two. He'd draw little grid lines on the picture and use those grid lines and transfer it onto a piece of plywood, and then he would cut it out, paint both sides so that it looked the same whether you were looking at it from the inside of the windows or from the outside. Such as this little fellow running to catch up with his caroling group. And they had to the left there, he cut out a tree and had little aluminum pipelets on there with Christmas lights in it. Well, with the passing of his father, Otto, in the spring of 1966, John became the general manager of the store. In the following year, Koetting's acquired the inventory of the Oakenfoos Clover Farm store, and owner Don Oakenfoos was invited to join the Koetting team. All things come to an end of sorts as in 1969, with the need for further expansion, but landlocked with an already shrinking parking area. The hard decision to eventually close the on-the-square location was made by the board. That same year, construction had begun on the new point-based shopping center on the outskirts of town, and Koetting's was offered prime position in the lineup of merchants. The new Koetting's Foodway had its grand opening on September 7, 1972. As a grand opening special, a total of 2,000 bags of groceries were given away to customers on the first day. The following day, 300 dozens of eggs were given to first customers. It took a little over a month to absorb the remaining stock from the downtown location, and within 6 months, all of the equipment from the old store had been sold off. It sat vacant for a short period, then became the home of the Ozark Regional Library. You might remember that. John continued to lead the store's development, which led to an expansion to the east and incorporated a new double entry facade in 1979. That's the original 1972 and 1979 edition. Koetting's Foodway Incorporated celebrated its 100th anniversary in the fall of 1987, which was John's last year spent at the store. See some of the people lined up for either the eggs or the free bags of groceries. Then we have a picture of three John Koettings. The picture on the right was taken on our 100th anniversary. That's John F., John A., myself, and my son John Patrick operating the machine back there. Shortly after his retirement, Dad was diagnosed with ALS. As his health continued to deteriorate, he was relegated to life, for the most part in a motorized scooter, buzzing around town and observing the town's happenings and offering his perspective as a guest editor for the St. Genevieve Herald in a weekly column entitled, "Have You Noticed?" He passed away from the disease in 1992. Fourth and fifth generations, I got my start in the business in the late 1950s, when after school I would separate glass, soda, and beer bottles into their appropriate cases. I believe my brothers also kind of remember that as well. We were paid a nickel for each case of 24 bottles that we separated. As I progressed through grade and high school, I added more duties, bagging and carrying out groceries, helping with inventory, stocking shelves, and helping build displays. The first display I can remember helping build with, was Sylvania Sam. Sylvania Sam was a 9-foot metallic robot. His eyes were Sylvania light bulbs that blinked on and off. And he was positioned in the front window of the store at that time so people could see him. After high school, I attended Seymour, and I worked at the store during the summers. After 3 years in the Army Band, I managed our other family business when I came back home. At that time was the Plaza Fabric Care Center, until there was an opening for me at the store. And then that was in '74. 5 years later, I joined the management team and helped plan our '79 expansion. Dad taught me the values of being a good Christian businessman and dealing with customers, employees, and suppliers. I tried to maintain those values at Koetting Foodway. Different changes or experiences that I've seen in the '70s, '80s, and '90s. Bigger shopping carts and family pack in produce and meat showed up as families at that time were getting bigger. We also saw extended hours, which led to actually Sunday hours, opening on Sunday. Price marking went through a bit of a change as well. When I first started working at the store, there were individual stamp pads that had 39 cents, 49 cents, or 59 cents stamped on them. You had stamp the can, whatever. And then that gave way to a Garvey labeler, which was a mechanical stamper. It had 5 bands around it that you could set the price, which led to prices like 3 for $1. Then there was the label gun, which was in plastic, and it shot out little paste-on labels. And then finally, barcodes. And once barcodes got there, then items didn't have to be individually marked anymore. Of course, that led to the automation of front ends, scanners, and computers, and I couldn't have gotten through that whole ordeal without Nikki's help, with her help in not only moral support, but with her knowledge of accounting and cashier procedures. We were able to make that, because we actually had to take one of every item and run it through one at a time and make sure there was no mistakes on it before we opened the next day. Another experience that we had in...
That's why I have a sleeping bag in my office.
Mrs. Tomyer celebrated her 100th birthday, and my son Michael and I used Grandpa's 48 Chevy, and she lived down behind the old store and had shopped with all 4 generations at that time of Koetting's. So we went and picked her up and took her out to the new store and gave her $100 to spend on, because she had family come in for her 100th birthday. that was a pretty neat day. Yeah, she filled us in on how she dealt with all the different generations of things living next door. She didn't even have a refrigerator because she just came over each day to get what she needed. As I said before, mass displays and theme promotions were something that we embraced. The picture on the right was our Wizard of Oz thing, promotion, and the gentleman sitting right directly in the center there was at that time one of the only two remaining Munchkins from the Wizard of Oz movie. We were able to bring him to town. We had a small parade through town, and he signed autographs and visited with people. His name was Mickey Carroll. The store also received some national recognition. My father was quoted in a national grocers magazine. And then we participated in several national contests, and we won one for the avocado display. So the last management team, I guess you might say, was my brother-in-law, Gene Operly, and myself. Fifth generation, our sons, Pat, Mike, and Tim all worked at the store, but had other interests and decided not to pursue that as a career. So in 1999, after 112 years, the decision was made to sell to the Lottis family, and I finished my career with Country Mart. So, there's a few miscellaneous pictures here. At the end, as we wind up, if you want to run. Oh, okay, I forgot about this one. All right. While I was researching family, I actually came across about 20 sheets of stationery that said the Mosher Store, O.E. Koetting, proprietor, Rural Route number 3, St. Genevieve, Missouri. And I thought, I never heard about that from my parents or my grandparents, nothing. But it turns out that my grandfather, operated this store from 1925 to 1932. Part of the area was called Mosher, and it was out by the Mississippi Lime Company. So it was in a unincorporated area, I guess you might say. And so security was a problem. And hat tip to Bob Mueller, who I called on to see if he knew anything about the Mosher store. And he found 3 articles that were written about the store. Unfortunately, 2 of them were about the burglaries that occurred there. And the third one was the announcement that he was closing the store. And that the equipment was all for sale. These are my 2 brothers next to a massive display of C&H sugar. This is an ad from 1960 and what the store would have looked like at that time. So so you can see where the store started from and kind of as it ended before we moved out of the downtown. We'll mention that the sign out in front, the vertical sign down top, was a neon sign. And during the reconstruction, when they were changing it into the museum, they uncovered a wall and found the switch and the sign had not been lit in 45 years, and they threw the switch and the sign came on. And we took one Friday night, Bob, right? One Friday evening, and lit it up for the whole town. What was the official year when you got possession of the building? Anyway, thank you very much. I appreciate it. It wasn't too long, and hope it was interesting for you to find out a little bit about our family and the store.
Theater, that frame around the back is on the back wall now. I think we left that because we built the case in front of it, a display case about the Missouri dinosaur. I think that frame is still on the wall back there. We decided not to cover it up. A lot of interesting things. I mean, I can't tell you how many people would come by and tell us how they got groceries upstairs. You might want to tell us that.
Okay, so I referred to the lift elevator that was that they use for the furniture. It's operated by a hand pull on a rope, and there was no railing on either side of it. So you just had a big counterweight that took you up the stairs, and as you got to the second floor, there was a covering that was over the top of it, and then the top of the elevator would push that up out of the way. And that thing was never quite exactly, it always hung at an angle, and you never knew if it was going to fall or not. But yeah, it was the kids always wanted to ride on it. It was, oh, that conveyor, that's what it was, okay, yeah. So we had a conveyor that would bring us the stock from the basement, and the groceries or overstock was all put in the basement. And so we had a conveyor belt that ran the stuff up the stairs up to the display floor.
Thank you very much. Do you got something?
I'll tell you, I didn't grow up in the grocery business, you know, so I met Jack, and after a couple of weeks, we went home, and we had some friends with me at his mom's house, and so we said, well, we ought to eat breakfast, and they said, his mom said, well, we don't have anything here, and I thought, well, then we're not going to have breakfast. And finds out that if you're in the grocery business, you can take the key to the back door and go in at all kinds of hours in the middle of the night and get what you need. And that's one of the best things about it. You don't have to think in advance. You need to get groceries for the whole week, you know, and you just get what you need. And we don't own a freezer. We still don't own a freezer because we had something we needed big to be frozen. Put it in the freezer at the store, and I miss that a lot. You know?
And that noise you heard was Mrs. Koetting turning over her grave. Again, a round of applause for Jack. Thank you very much. We so appreciate it. Folks, again, a good thank you to Dick for letting us use this facility. We couldn't have these without Dick. And we thank all of you for coming and enjoying this presentation. We look forward to seeing you at the next presentation. Be safe on the way home. And last statement, the person that sponsored this was Country Home, the grocery store.